The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Amid protests and threats of lawsuits, San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe announced there will be no criminal charges filed against 5 sheriff's deputies in the taser-related death of Chinedu Okobi in Millbrae. Wagstaffe is here to talk about this incident. The game is justice. The game is on. I'm Mark Simon. My partner Kevin Mullin is on assignment. Welcome to the game. In October, 36-year-old Chinedu Okobi was confronted by sheriff's deputies on El Camino Real in Millbrae. Attempts to detain him ultimately resulted in his being tasered several times. Okobi subsequently died, and an autopsy said cardiac arrest occurred following, quote, physical exertion, physical restraint, and electro-muscular disruption, unquote, from the taser shocks. District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe has announced that no charges will be pursued against the deputies. He is here to talk about this. This was the 3rd taser-related death involving police in San Mateo County in a year. Steve Wagstaffe has been a prosecutor for 41 years. The last 9 as San Mateo County District Attorney, and he was just reelected in last year. We're going to show the incident involving Mr. Okobi. Led to a 30-minute video compiled by the DA's office from bystanders, patrol car dash cameras, and surveillance cameras from nearby businesses. Ultimately, the DA reviewed a total of more than 6 hours of audio and video. We're going to show just a sliver of that 30-minute video, the first minute or so of the incident, to set the stage for our conversation. We should note, the Sheriff's Office serves as the contractor police department for the city of Millbrae. So, Garrett, why don't you go ahead and roll that tape right now?
You're gonna get tased. Get on the ground now. Get on the ground. Get on the ground. On the ground. Roll over. Roll over on your. Roll over. Roll over. On your stomach now. On your stomach. Now. On your stomach now. On your stomach. On your stomach now. Roll over. Roll over. Roll over. No. On your stomach. What did I do? On your stomach, sir. Now. On your stomach. I'm gonna tease you again if you don't roll over on your stomach. Get him off. Okay, on your stomach. On your stomach, sir.
Okay, thank you for being here, Steve. Even the clip we showed, people can go to the DA's website and see the entire video. This doesn't show what preceded where we see them first confronting Mr. Okobi, and your video does show that. So describe to us what led up to the confrontation we saw in this short clip.
This clip is about 3.5 minutes into the whole thing. If one goes to the San Mateo County District Attorney's Office page, you'll find the whole thing there. In that first few minutes, it shows from the dash cam of the first officer, it shows the first sight or contact with Mr. Okobi as he is crossing the street on El Camino in a non-crosswalk area, basically where he was committing the violation of law that caught the officer's attention. It then shows how the officers then tried to ask him to stop, and he left that officer and kept walking away. And then over those 3 minutes, it shows him approximately 7 times crossing back and forth across El Camino in an effort to walk away from the deputies as they were trying to detain him and carry out the function they were doing there.
So one of the standards, I assume, is he a danger to himself or to others? Do you think the videotape in your investigation showed that clearly the police were responding appropriately to somebody who was a danger to himself and a danger to others?
No, I don't think that's the basis for the stop. I think the basis for the stop, Mark, was that over the course of the prior, I think it's about 6.5 years, along that 1.5 mile stretch of El Camino, there had been 48 traffic incidents involving pedestrians.
It is the widest stretch of El Camino, maybe anywhere. I mean, it's 6 or 7 lanes at certain points.
Yes, it is. It's a wide stretch. There had been all these accidents, and the deputies had been told by their captain just a couple weeks earlier, we need enforcement out there. We're having too many accidents and injuries, so I want enforcement. And that's what motivated the first deputy to try and make the contact with him. There was no danger particularly at that point, other than the danger of somebody in the street. But there hadn't been cars screaming to a halt or anything like that. But because there had been enforcement, the deputy asked him to stop so he could talk to him. Mr. Okobi clearly wanted to get away from the deputy.
Okay, but then the next question is, because the response was a physical altercation and the tasering, again, that would seem like it would say, okay, he's a danger in some way or another. There's a risk of violence that requires a use of force, and it's, at least the clip we saw, which is of course a very small segment, doesn't look like he's a particular danger. It looks like he's just refusing to cooperate.
Yes, I think that's an accurate statement at that point. It's what occurred at that point. He had gone back and forth across the road. Remember, the deputies, we know in hindsight, we know what was going on with Mr. Okobi. We know there was mental illness at play there. We know that he had this fear of the law enforcement and just wanted to get away from them. Those deputies did not. And so what the law says is that we must view it through the eyes of a reasonable police officer as to what they're doing. And where the key point was, when the deputy, the first 2 times, said to him, hey, sir, please stop so I can talk to you. And under the law, every citizen has to respond to that. You don't get to just walk away under those circumstances. When he kept moving, the path was set, that they were going to have to make contact with him. Now, where it escalated, as what you see on that video clip you just showed the audience, and that is where he was moving away from them. He was then walking in and out of traffic. Cars had to come to a quick stop. Then they knew for safety they had to find out what they were dealing with. When that first deputy went up to him, you saw that, the young woman who walked up to him and put her hand on his wrist to say, basically, let's stop and talk, and he flung it off. That's what brought the others there, because at that point, what he's doing is he is resisting an officer in the performance of their duty. Now, what we do from that point on is we measure. They had a right to make the arrest there legally. And then what we measure was the use of force proportionate. Reasonable is what the law uses, the word the law uses. Was that reasonable under the circumstances to do that? And that was the issue that was presented to my office and for me ultimately as to was that a reasonable use of force as it went on.
Okay, and we're going to take a quick break and come back to address that specific question. Stick around, we'll be right back with District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. We're talking to San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe about the most recent incident involving a gentleman named Okobi having been tasered and ultimately died after the confrontation with police. You were talking about use of reasonable force, or reasonable use of force. We saw on the clip they tasered him. They tasered him several times. He was down on the ground. Why wouldn't that have been sufficient?
The reason that the deputies did it, why it was reasonable, is because they kept ordering him turn over. You hear that on the tape if any of your audience listens to it, turn over, and they're repeatedly saying, turn over, turn over. And instead what he was doing is he was kicking at them and that. And people have asked me, well, he's on the ground. What are you worried about? Well, here's what police training is everywhere in the United States. You never try to deal with somebody when they're face up. And the reason is the ability to knee or kick you, or as I was educated, to grab at a gun, to grab at some tool. And so that's why they want them over on their back, and then they'll do the physical force. But at that point, they're ordering him, and he wasn't complying with that. And that's why they were looking for some tool to use. that would help them assist to get this man into custody, this 330-pound, 6'3" man into custody, without having, obviously they had no basis to ever use deadly force, to use a firearm. They were looking to use one of their others. One of them you saw used pepper spray. Mm-hmm. And the answer is, when you're in close quarters, you don't use pepper spray, because what happened here happened. Yeah. Two of the deputies had to drop out of the confrontation because it went to their eyes. And so that wasn't a tool available. They had their nightstick out there, but that in close quarters, again, is very difficult to use, and against a big person may not mean anything. Mm-hmm. So that's why they went to the tool that law enforcement has used over the last 20 to 25 years, and that is the taser device.
This may be a hard question. But for all the things that may have been wrong with Mr. Okobi, you referenced off the air that he may have been having mental health issues, specifically in regards to being confronted by police. It doesn't look like what he did meant that he deserved to die.
No question whatsoever, Mark. There's nobody could ever say he deserved to die, or that it was anything other than a horrific tragedy that Mr. Okobi died. It's just those sad things. You know, it could have happened the other way. As we know from the pathology autopsy afterward, he had heart disease. He had weakened walls of the heart. He had an enlarged heart. And if it had been a sprint chase, maybe that would have been the day that, his heart went out on him. We don't know. All we know is that, of course, it's a tragedy, and it's a shame that it ended in this fashion. People have said, well, you know what? He was jaywalking. Why do you take this action for somebody jaywalking? And the answer is, it's not for jaywalking. That was the basis to detain him. The law said, let's stop him. You can stop him and find out what's going on. You can find a man who's walking in traffic. Does he have mental health issues? The concern of the deputies is for them and other drivers and people in the road. And so, but at that point, when he's 7 times gone in and out of traffic, causing vehicles to stop, then they had a duty to stop him. And when he resisted that, it moves into a resisting and obstructing an officer, which led to the tragedy that occurred.
We've been using the term reasonable use of force, and it sounds like it's a hard and fast standard. Is it?
Yeah.
Is there a legal definition? And how did this action by these deputies not violate that standard?
2 excellent questions. And the answer is yes, reasonableness is the standard. That is the standard in the California Penal Code, as it defines the force in Penal Code Section 835, the force that a law enforcement officer can use in effectuating an arrest. Additionally, the United States Supreme Court, 30 years ago this year, ruled that officers may use reasonable force. In the law, reasonableness is the standard, both by statute. We use it everywhere. Everybody's familiar with the standard of which we convict people. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Reasonableness is our standard. Now, the second question is, well, then how is this reasonable in this case? And the answer to that one...
Let me stop you for a second.
Go ahead.
Because I would assume reasonable is defined as essentially what 12 jurors will ultimately determine is reasonable.
It is. It is a standard that whether a jury or a judge or the public at large will evaluate. You're right. Yeah. And in this case, in my evaluation, that was the district attorney's office making that same evaluation.
Right. So how did you determine that this did not rise to the level of unreasonableness? Yeah,
I think it would have been because of what the effort they were undertaking. And I think the bottom core of it was certainly, I believe, the efforts to detain him, the efforts to follow him. They were all reasonable under the law to effectuate their duty. The question really came down to, okay, he was tased 3 times. There may have been some additional efforts that it didn't work, but he was tased 3 times. And in that time frame, was that reasonable to use? And my answer was yes. I think it could have been far more dangerous if they had suddenly done, think about the Rodney King case, if they'd taken out batons and started hitting him with that. The goal of the taser was to simply get him to stop resisting and go with them. And you know what? It happens every single day in this country where the taser is being used. In this county, it's being done regularly, where the taser gets used and it effectuates its purpose. What the deputies did not know here, and there's no way it can be known, is that the taser is not a device to use when somebody has mental health issues. They did not know whether they were dealing with mental health issues or they're dealing with somebody who's on drugs. Number 2, you don't use a taser on a person who has a bad heart. But none of us walk around with that sign on us, I have a bad heart. Yeah. And that was the unknown, and that's one of the concerns about the use of the taser.
Why don't you use a taser on people with mental health? It doesn't work?
Yes, and so it really doesn't. That's it. You know, our Board of Supervisors had a forum last month where they talked about it, and they had the experts both from the people opposing the use of the taser and the taser organization, Axon, and they all agree that is now that if you know you're dealing with somebody with mental health issues, that for whatever reason it is a danger to them and the effect it could be used. And I think that's the conclusion. I don't know the full reason why.
Isn't it possible that in the process of tasering him, whatever the term is, that he would have not been able to respond to an order to roll over? In other words, it's a shock. It may just be enough to manage the shock, and that you may be unaware or unable to comply to an order to roll over.
Good question, and very much the case. I would answer yes to that. It could be possible. Not in this one, because he was continuing to speak to the deputies. He was saying, stay away from me, get off of me. At one point, he made the statement, follow the word of God, which was the first sign they might have had that this might be mental health that we're dealing with here. But after being tased 3 times, and he then still got up, the sergeant said, drop the taser, meaning it's not working. This is not an effort. And then they went to their other effort. Another important point in terms of the death of Mr. Okobi's death is he, unlike other death cases, the other 2 we had in our county where the person died very quickly after the tasing occurred. In this case, it was almost 13 minutes with the paramedics there when suddenly his heart, he stopped beating on them at that point. That's unusual. That's nothing that we've seen before. And again, the whole cause of death in this case, we know his heart stopped. Why it stopped, that will never be known.
We're going to take another break. Stick around. We'll be right back with District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to The Game. I'm Mark Simon. We're talking with San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe about the tasering and death of Chinedu Okobi in Millbrae in October. The district attorney just recently announced that he would file no charges against the 5 deputies involved in this incident. After that ruling, Mr. Okobi's family asserted, and I'm quoting, "It's clear the district attorney doesn't intend for there to be any consequences at all." And of course, the attorney for the family, Mr. Burris, has been very angry about this ruling. What's your response to this accusation that you don't intend for there to be any consequences?
I understand what they're feeling, because before they even know any facts, before they've had a chance to read everything I have, all the family and the attorney have already declared it a murder. And so I understand for them, that's the only answer that would satisfy them. My job's not in that category. What we do, the lane that I am in, is to assess whether it violates the California Penal Code. Is it a homicide? Is it an excessive use of force under the circumstances? And part 2, if I felt it was, could it be proved to a jury? I didn't have to get to the second question, because it is my belief that what the deputies did here, tragic as it is, horrible that it had this outcome, was a lawful use of their performance of their duty, lawful use and reasonable use of force.
So it sounds like she's right. You don't think there should be consequences to the deputies about what happened?
Remember, my issue isn't whether there are consequences. They're filing a lawsuit. They can go into a civil suit with a far lesser standard of proof, and if a jury there wants to find the deputies culpable, that's theirs. Mine is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime occurred here, and mine is. That's what I do every day. On the 18 to 20,000 cases my office reviews in this county every year, we are holding people accountable, but on the same evaluation. Did a crime occur, and can it be proved? And that's why we do it. So yes, I believe in consequences, and we do it. I mean, as one, I think, got a great deal of publicity. Just 2 weeks before I made this announcement, my office filed charges against a deputy sheriff for beating 3 people in the jail. When there is evidence that shows that somebody is engaging in this case, excessive force, we'll hold people accountable. But here's the answer in this case. They don't have to agree with it. But the fact of it is, after you read everything and read the law, They didn't commit a crime here. Hence, there's no criminal accountability that would be appropriate.
You referenced that Mr. Okobi had a history of mental health problems. I don't think that was a substantial part of your report and the announcement about why you weren't filing charges.
Correct. We didn't go into it in detail. And this was after discussion because no matter what the Okobi family and their attorney feels about me and my decision, that's not the guiding point. I still want to be compassionate for the loss they've suffered. They've suffered a deep loss. And to that extent, I didn't go into his background. I didn't go into depth into the mental health issues other than to note they existed. And it's really because out of respect for them and it was not crucial to my decision because the deputies, when they were making their decisions, and I'm evaluating their conduct under the law, they didn't know there were mental health issues. And so therefore, it wasn't something that weighed heavily into my decision. It's just an explanation for why Mr. Okobi might have been fearful and acting the way he did.
Yeah. A generation ago, before police departments began diversifying demographically, ethnically, police officers were mostly white, mostly big guys. The response to that has been to issue more tools to law enforcement, like tasers, to allow them to subdue suspects, to find a level of reasonable use of force. Are tasers safe? We've had 3 deaths now in a year. Are they safe, or are they too dangerous to be used and deployed in a common purpose?
That's a great question. And the question really flows down to, should there be a moratorium on the use of tasers? And that's a question that goes to, in the county level, that goes to the San Mateo County Sheriff. On the city level, that goes to the police chiefs and their city managers and their councils. And while it is not in my lane to make that call itself, what I have called for is every single city and the sheriff needs to study it and look at it. And to that extent, I've accumulated thousands of pages of material on taser. You know, the Reuters organization did a 25-year study on tasers in America, on what it's occurred. And I'm providing all of that to the cities, to the police chiefs, and to the sheriff, so they can study it and make their assessment on it. So my answer to that is, of course, with 3 deaths, all tragic, definitely, it ought to be looked at and studied and decide, do you still want to go? Every city in our county has use of the taser, except for one city, East Palo Alto, has chosen not to, but all the others have. And because it has the potential in these 3 cases, but it also has potential to stop going to the weapon. There are certain cases where they can use the taser instead of going to the firearm in those cases, and that's preferable. We want that.
Of course, the thinking there is that use of a taser is not deadly force. But we've had 3 instances where it may have been in some a factor in being deadly force. The other thing is we've had 3 incidents and not in a single case has one of the police officers been charged. Right. Does that not bother you?
No, because what would bother me is if I felt that there was criminal liability and I chose not to do it. Because again, the role of the district attorney is to implement the law. You know, there was at one of the Board of Supervisors public comment section, a couple of the people unhappy with my decision made the comment, why does the DA keep referring to the penal code? Why does he keep referring to the law? Why doesn't he just do what he feels is right? If I did that, I would be violating the oath I took to uphold the law. And that's what my job is. And in all 3 of these cases, and every one of them is horrifically sad, but in all 3 cases, the officers were within the law, and that's what my job is to do, is to not do, as those 2 citizens said, throw the penal code out, ignore the law. The day we become a law of men rather than a country of laws is the day anarchy and dictatorships take over, and I'm glad that I'm not on that road.
But we're doing this in the context of a time, and we're running out of time, so it's a loaded question to ask you, but where it seems like more and more there are incidents involving police and African Americans, where the African Americans are victims or die, or victims may be the wrong word, but are being killed, are being hurt, and of course there's a huge number that are in our prisons. Don't those factors have to weigh in as well? I mean, don't you have to take into consideration just how, an elected official, how things may look to a public that expects you to treat everybody fairly?
I agree with that very much, and that's what I'm trying to do. You know, when people talked about this being a black issue, I wholeheartedly dispute that description, because as to, what the two prior ones, they involved a man of Filipino-American descent, there was a man of Indian-American descent, and I am as equally concerned about their deaths as I am that. This is not a black issue. This is a use of force issue. And that's why our legislature right now has 2 bills in front of it to consider changing that reasonableness standard to another standard. And our legislature will make the call, and I will enforce whatever law they give us. But of course, any death gives me cause for concern. So many of the people that called up to me said, I'm just tired of white cops killing black men. And I viewed that as a racist comment by itself, because in this case, for instance, the deputy who was doing the taser was an Asian American officer. And to just assume it's a white officer is a racism on their side. I'm concerned about it, but I'm trying to do it colorblind and what's best for the community.
We're going to have to stop on that note. District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe, thank you for being with us. And thank you for being with us, and join us next time on The Game.